let's dive into our discussion of the night. The first cohort of the competency-based curriculum, CBC, joined junior secondary schools yesterday, Monday 30th. A lot of efforts and planning have no doubt been put in place to ensure a smooth transition process. However, even as students continue to stream in, we are witnessing some hiccups in the process. Tonight, education expert and teacher Jasper Ondimu is joining us live to discuss the JSS transition. Welcome to studio, Mwalimu Jasper Ondimu. Glad to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you, Anne, for having me on the show. For the first time, I remember some years back when I was starting this particular profession of education, I was hosted by your colleague, that is Jesse Rogers and the likes of Noah, who were among the first presenters there, and have made it in the industry, and I hope that in the coming days your star is going to shine.
Indeed, absolutely. I'm glad to walk in their shoes. Now let's just dive right into it. Yesterday we witnessed students join the junior secondary schools across the country, the very first pioneer class of the CBC program, and they have been given this whole week for parents to prepare themselves for that transition. And this is for those who didn't report yesterday. As an education expert, how would you rate the process of this admission in schools so far?
Thank you, Anne. Some mixed reactions, depending on where you're looking at it from. If you're looking at it from the private sector view, then it is a good day for the private sector, because really a good number of private schools are well prepared. I have had an opportunity to watch even some reports from media houses as they try to contrast what is happening in public schools and in private schools. As early as today, the children were in class learning. On the other side, you look at the public schools, the teachers who the Teacher Service Commission was employing haven't reported in the public schools, and even those that were in the primary side with degrees, they haven't been deployed to go and teach public schools. And therefore, it really tells you the kind of challenge that is posed to the public sector, that they are not really prepared for the implementation of CBC. On the other hand, the private sector, as I have enumerated, is well prepared. They began their lessons, and therefore that is why some people might be justified to say, CBC is going to do well in private schools, because a number of them recruited teachers in advance over the holiday. I think you saw in social media, they were advertising, they're looking for teachers, they did interviews, they hired competent teachers, and therefore, beginning today, some of them were still learning, while in the public sector, they are in limbo.
Now, how would you say schools prepared for this transition in terms of the choice of uniforms and everything that is needed in this new curriculum to ensure that the students have an easy time settling in? We've also seen some students reporting to their various institutions without school uniforms. What could be the cause?
It is very simple that there are some parts in this country where economically they are not, the people there, or the parents for that case, are not doing well. To some parents, even affording a new uniform is a big challenge. And therefore, some of them have no option at all but to send these particular children with home clothes. And I think the CS was right recently when he said that the head teachers should not send these children home because of lacking some pair of shoes, lacking some shirts, or lacking uniform in general. Because as some people will loosely translate in the rural areas or any other place, they will say that uniform as isomi, although that is not the trajectory that I may want to take. But parents, remember, parents were not prepared for grade 7 being domiciled in junior secondary school. They were not prepared in advance, and therefore even economically they didn't take their time to plan. And therefore, when you see these children reporting to school with home clothes, it really shows that life is very tough on the parents. And instead of the parent just sitting there and allowing the child to stay at home without going to school, better this child go with home clothes to school. And I think that brings the conversation that as a country, we need to think about this issue of uniforms. Because you look at other countries, United States of America, Finland, some of these developed countries do not have the uniforms that we have here in Kenya. Someone can go to school with home clothes, and I think that that is the conversation that we need to have. Therefore, to that extent, the lack of uniforms should not prevent a principal from admitting a learner. Parents are really reeling from the effects of COVID-19, job losses. The economy is doing terrible, and therefore let us allow the parents to adjust.
But do you think the heads of schools will adhere to this directive by the CS not to send these students without uniforms home?
They ought to adhere to what the CS says. Otherwise, we have the county directors of education, and also at the lowest level, we have the sub-county director of education. It is their responsibility to ensure that some of these policies of the government are enforced. Therefore, I think as the principals have really no alternative but to adhere to what the ministry is saying. Because sometimes if we turn a blind eye on the plight of this particular parents missing school on account of uniform, is really very bad, especially now to this particular parent. Of course, I understand from a teacher's perspective, sometimes you want order in school, you want some form of identity. But on the other hand, you wait on other issues and you realize that the right to education for this particular child is quite crucial. Therefore, there should not be any problem enforcing that directive, because we have the TSC and also the Ministry of Education officials up to the lowest level of the sub-county.
Right. Now, the government has set aside 9.6 billion shillings to facilitate learning activities in public junior secondary schools. Do you think the government will be able to reach this goal that they have for this curriculum?
Initially, we need to appreciate the fact that the Jubilee regime or the government of President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta ought to have done better as far as the implementation of CBC is concerned. You talk to any education expert, he will tell you the processes of changing a curriculum. And these particular processes were not adhered to. A good example is piloting. This curriculum was not piloted. Ordinarily, this curriculum ought to have been piloted all the way to the university level, so that now the stakeholders can look at the challenges that they have observed, such that when the curriculum is being implemented full swing, these particular problems are dealt with. And therefore, considering that the government then of Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta bypassed these particular processes, we are in a problem right now, whereby the issue of resources is coming in. The government is saying they're going to be sending 9.6 billion shillings, and that also begs the question, did the government, when they were conceptualizing CBC, did they look at the economics of this particular curriculum? Did they ask themselves, how much is it going to take to educate a child in junior secondary? How much is it going to take to educate a child in senior secondary? Right. Because what is happening right now are parents being ambushed. They're being told, the government is saying they're going to pay 15,000 shillings, but you've seen principals are still sending children home. What about the children in the private sector? How is it going to be? So we must understand it from that context, that the CBC process began with the flaws, and I think the Kenya Kwanza government is trying to straighten some of these particular flaws that were made by the Jubilee administration. So, and therefore, the issue of resourcing is a challenge. And I think education economists ought to sit down and tell us how much is it going to take to implement this particular curriculum, so that we don't really shoot in the dark. So that is a really dark gray area as far as the economics of CBC are concerned. Nobody knows exactly how much is supposed to take a parent in some of these classes, even as we move on.
Yeah. Now, yesterday, Western Region Coordinator of Education, Stephen Barongo, said some 271 out of 2,540 public primary schools, this is in Kakamega, Bungoma, Busia, and Vihiga counties, are not eligible to offer junior secondary education. And this, he said, is because of inadequate infrastructure and the population of learners. Now, in a case like this, what really is the way forward, and how are the learners in these mentioned areas going to be accommodated and be up to date with their fellows countrywide?
That is indeed a very great challenge, because you look at some of the schools, they are situated quite far apart, in the sense that if you say we are not going to approve this school because they've not met the requirements, and then they're supposed to go and be merged with another school, that is really a challenge on the parents, and it is going to hinder on the right to education for these children. I think the government needs to really handle this particular issue with the urgency it deserves. The government might decide, okay, for example, the government is saying these schools, especially the public schools, do not have capacity, they do not have laboratories, they do not have classrooms. Why can't then the government look at the distance that these particular learners are going to cover and construct the necessary facilities that are required, instead of putting a blanket directive that these particular schools have not been approved? Because as a country, we don't want again to retrogress or take some steps backward as far as the realization of the right of education is concerned to these children of Kakamega County. So I think it is really very sad, and especially to parents who are really suffering. You can imagine going to look for a school, and schools opened some 2 weeks ago, and now you're required to look for a school. So the inconvenience that these parents are being subjected to, it is not their own making, and therefore they should not be inconvenienced further by the government. The government ought to facilitate the right to education, not to inhibit the right to education.
Right. Now, also, Education Cabinet Secretary Ezekiel Mashogu earlier today banned morning and night preps. He was saying classes should begin at 8 a.m. up to 3:45 p.m. Now, as a tutor, do you think this would have any effect to the students academically?
Yes, it is going to have effects to the students academically, and I think the CS needs to be advised that once you're trying to, the question is, what problem are you trying to solve, and why are schools teaching up to 4 p.m., up to 5 p.m., up to 7 p.m.? Why are schools engaging learners during this particular time? The first reason is that the curriculum is very bulky to the learners, in the sense that if you take the normally allocated time of 8 a.m. to 3:45, by the time you are in third term, you might find that you've not finished the syllabus. So the teachers and the students and the parents will work on a model and say that, let us use some of these extra hours after 3:45 so that you can be able to finish the syllabus on time. Number two, learners have different abilities. They don't learn at the same time. So there are some learners that might require individualized attention, and hence the remedial lessons after 3:45 they come in handy. There is also another aspect where there is still competition. Look at the results that were released by the KCSE results, where the CS told us that it is only 19% of the students that scored C+ and above. What does that tell you? That more than 80% of the students literally failed. in a country where the system of education is majorly on outcome based or on recalling, that means that the teachers are supposed to spend quite a number of hours with the pupil. And you look at some of these schools, and I don't know where you schooled in your high school, but you look at some of these great schools, quote unquote great schools, Alliances, Mangu, Light Academy, and they sacrifice a lot of time to finish the syllabus, a lot of time to revise, a lot of time to prepare. Therefore, in the absence of a level playing ground by the Ministry of Education in terms of equipping schools equally, these particular schools should have teachers, because you look at some of these schools, the national schools, you'll find that they have excess teachers. But there are some schools in far-flung areas, they don't have teachers. And you're putting these schools on an equal pedestal. That means that some students are going to benefit. So the long and the short of it is that sometimes we need to look at what is the intention. For example, when teachers are introducing the remedial lessons after 3:45, are they doing that because they have a bad intention? Are they doing that because of good intention? And the correct answer is that teachers are doing this for a good intention. And therefore, I think the CS should first look at the real problems. Instead of treating the symptoms, let us address the real problems, equip these schools equally, ensure that there is a good ratio, teacher-student ratio, so that some schools don't feel disadvantaged. And also, it should not, the curriculum must be lessened a bit, because you try to be sluggish, you will not finish the syllabus, the exams are coming, KCSE, and then these particular schools are considered not performing. Therefore, as much as I appreciate that as a society we are spending a lot of time in class, making these learners to do a lot of work in class. They are some of them in primary schools are very young. Early in the morning they are in class. Yes, there is that particular challenge where you really need these learners to rest. But on the other hand, the reality is that according to the curriculum, if you don't cover it with these extra lessons after 3:45, then you're not going to make it. Therefore, I think the CS should not be simplistic on this particular issue of saying we have banned lessons outside 3:45 p.m. I think there needs to be some structured conversation on that.
Right. Now, there are several lapses that have been witnessed as the JSS transition continues, one of them being late books distribution, and some schools have not yet received their JSS books that the government promised to deliver. The Teachers Service Commission is also yet to deploy new teachers for the curriculum. What will you say about this?
It speaks to the fact that the government was not adequately prepared to implement CBC. And this is not really a Kenya Kwanza problem in making, because the implementation began with the government of Uhuru Kenyatta, and especially when we went to the elections, there was some kind of laissez-faire attitude where the government did not put its best foot forward, and now the Kenya Kwanza government is really inheriting some of the problems that could have adequately been solved by the government of Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. And therefore, when we are in this particular problem, we must really understand that the problem is not Kenya Kwanza. I'm not absolving Kenya Kwanza any blame, but what I'm saying is that the government ought to have done much better. We need the PS, the education PS, the cabinet secretary to be very vibrant and plan things ahead of time, such that if you're talking about the issue of books, these books ought to have been at the sub-county level as the schools are opening, and therefore, we can just forgive Kenya Kwanza. They're doing their best. They have inherited a problem, but I think they should also be more organized. They must listen to stakeholders. They must think ahead of time. Otherwise, if they don't think ahead of time, then you're going to create another problem in 3 years. when the learners are going to transition to senior secondary school. And senior secondary school might not be like what we've seen in junior secondary school. In junior secondary school, it is a bit manageable. But in senior secondary schools, more resources would have been needed. There's also an element of specialization, and therefore, as a country, we need to prepare in advance. So as I try to mitigate my words on the government of Kenya Kwanza, I think they should pull up their socks.
All right, now, before we call it a wrap, Mwalimu, any parting shots?
Mine is to urge the government, as I've said, to listen to the stakeholders. If the government of Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta listened to what the Kenya National Union of Teachers was saying, listened to education experts other than those at the KICD, probably we could not have been in this particular situation that we are in. Let the government of His Excellency William Ruto listen to all stakeholders, and I think they have expressed some intention or interest in listening to every voice. That is the right way to go. Let us listen to the parents, and they should not be dismissed. I think when the president came into power, he responded, or he talked about the issue of parental involvement in CBC, and saying that, parents cannot escape their responsibilities. Parents must be involved in the learning of their children, not understanding that CBC overly involved the parents. No parent has refused to help the child, but then can it be every day after work the child is not sleeping? So there is that particular issue of parental involvement that needs to be scaled down. So the government ought to listen to all stakeholders for the betterment of the education sector. So thank you so much for hosting me for the first time, and you are so eloquent. I wish you well.
Thank you so much for your time. We hope to have you here with us some other time. Right, that is Mwalimu Jasper Ondimu sharing his input on the matter of junior secondary transition. We are taking our second short break at this point. Much lined up for you, so stay tuned.